My fair citizens of Sodium City, it is time. This is going to be the first batch of cards that we are going to brew around when Kaldheim is released. This is going to be the first 10. Tomorrow's video is going to be the second 10. So make sure to watch both of them. Now, the first card that we're going to start off with is the Starnheim Courser. This is just a 3-mana 2/2 flyer that makes your artifacts and enchantment spells cost 1 less. Now, this can be very, very good, but it can also be very, very bad, depending on how you implement it within your deck. Now, the way this can be very good is obviously play a lot of very expensive big dick artifacts and or enchantments, being like Haphazard Bombardment, Axis of Mortality, Sunbird's Invocation, God Pharaoh's Statue, Combustible Gearhulk, Noxious Gearhulk, Sharding Sphinx, Cruel Reality, Cure Best Sea Gods, Overwhelming Splendor, Omniscience, etc., etc., etc. But those are going to be the ones that I'm going to kind of focus on a little bit more than anything else in this coming set. Now again, the reason that these can be pretty bad is that it is a creature, and creatures are usually really easy to get rid of, especially when you're running an enchantment deck. So if this is the only creature that we're running, we're going to run into a problem to where we just gave them a reason to use their burn spells or use their removal spells or their AoE removal spells or something. We're giving them a reason to use the spells that would otherwise be dead in their hand. So the only other thing that we can do is give them other creatures to kill or whatever that could also be a threat, being like Stesson Champion or Archon of Sun's Grace, something else that benefits a lot from these enchantments that can also be a big threat later on in the game, or something that we can use early on to apply a lot of pressure. Just like a combination of the two, hopefully we can marry them up and just kind of push in for the victories. And of course, with any enchantment heavy deck, you're going to need a lot of supporting actors, being like Enchantress Presence. Mirari's Wake always helps too. Calyx is a fantastic card. It just enables you to get your enchantments out. The new Ajani, or the 6-mana Ajani, I guess he's old. But it's fantastic. There's so many things that help enchantments. Being able to make them indestructible is something you might want to look out for, because I can only imagine there's going to be so much artifact and enchantment hate going on right now. However, this card is so versatile and it can go in so many different shells. You can put it with black, green, blue, red, white. You can even do completely colorless with it, although of course this creature is white, so you will have to have some type of white mana to be able to cast it. But the fact that it helps artifacts, there's so many things that you can do with it. So you can just throw in Chromatic Lantern to give you that white mana. There's just so many things that you can do with this card. It just depends on what type of shell you want to put it in or what win condition you want. There's just so much, it's hard to list everything. So if you want the deck lists of what I decided to do with this, you know where it is, description below. And the best thing that we could do is just make a ton of copies of it. So using Mirror March would be sweet. If we play it and just flips like 5 times or something, we're able to cast Bombardment for 1 mana. We're able to cast Cruel Reality for 2 mana. All this other sorts of crazy stuff. It could be really funny, but most likely it would be very, very bad, because Mirror March is just bad in general. But it could be really, really funny. I'm excited to give it a whirl. The second card we're going to go over is Orvar, the All Form. This card is kind of cool. I don't know how it is going to be in reality, but in theory it is very, very cool, and it has a very high chance for abuse. Orvar is a 4-mana 3/3 legendary shapeshifter with Changeling. So whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets 1 or more permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. So for instance, if you cast a Heliod's Intervention and you target 5 of your own enchantments, you can only make a copy of 1 of those enchantments. So keep that in mind. It does restrict it to just making a copy of 1. You can't make a copy of like 20 different things with 1 spell, because that would be absolutely fucking busted. The second part of this card reads, when a spell or an ability an opponent control causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. Now this is any permanent. It can be theirs, it can be yours. So that's super, super cool. If they just say, hey, discard 2 cards, like Mind Rot or whatever, you're like, okay, I'll discard this and make a copy of a land or make a copy of their planeswalker or whatever it ends up being. It's really cool. It really does have a little reminiscing of Nullhide Ferox, to where whenever an opponent makes you discard it, you put it on the battlefield instead. So that's actually really cool. I think it's just a little bit more valuable to make a copy of any permanent that's currently on the battlefield. Although it does depend on how early they end up discarding it, because if they do turn 1 Thought Steve and then make you discard this, the only thing you can do is like copy their swamp, which is ramp technically, but it does suck if you lose your creature. And if you're not using black, you can really only tap it for a colorless for the most part, but it's something to keep in mind. One of the ways that we're going to be able to abuse this is by using Mythos of Illuna. So as long as we can use Mythos of Illuna on like a high-powered target, being Cure Best Sea Gods or something like that, what we can do is we target it with Mythos of Illuna to make a copy of it, but then with Orvar out, we're actually going to make an additional copy of it. So that is also very, very cool. So for 4 mana, we can actually create 2 additional Cure Best Sea Gods enchantments. Very, very powerful. And of course, there's little synergies here and there, like with Teferi's Time Twist, how you can target any permanent you control. So for instance, you can Teferi's Time Twist your own Lotus Field if you have Blood Sun out. So you tap your Lotus Field for 3 blue, Teferi Time Twist it. For 2 mana, you're going to create a copy of the Lotus Field, which is untapped, and you'll still have a floating blue source. So for 2 mana, you're going to float 1 blue, and then you're going to have an untapped 3 mana. So that's actually extremely powerful and very, very good just for ramp in general. But again, that is just one of like the key little tiny synergies that you can use with something as stupid as Teferi's Time Twist. And there's a couple other cards that I really wanted to abuse in the past that I just haven't really been able to, or it just wasn't powerful enough for me to justify using them. Aether Tradewinds being one of them. So Aether Tradewinds, you're going to return a permanent you control and return a permanent an opponent controls, and it is an instant. So if you have Orvar out, you just target, whatever permanent you want, you make a copy of it as you bounce it back to your hand, and you're returning something to the opponent's hand. So if you bounce something that has an enter the battlefield effect or something like a land, returning it to your hand makes a copy of the land, and it doesn't really matter at that point because you're literally just replacing the land that you just did as a copy. So again, this is something that's so stupid and so little that might actually make Aether Tradewinds viable in a stupid little way when you're copying the spell with Primal Amulet or double vision or double cast, whatever it ends up being. Something like that can be very, very good. One of the other things I want to try is with Seismic Shift. So Seismic Shift, you're going to destroy land, and then up to 2 target creatures can't block this turn. You're going to target your own creatures with this. So with Orvar, you don't want to make a copy of Orvar because it's legendary, but if you have another creature out, you can actually target that creature, as it can't block, but it's on your turn anyway, so it's irrelevant. You can actually make a copy of that creature, and so you're destroying a land and copying a creature you have for 4 mana. That's actually really, really funny. So it is something that I want to try. I really, really want to try that. Have you heard of Phyrexian Obliterator? Have you also heard of Prey Upon? Have you heard of both of them together and then copying the Phyrexian Obliterator with Prey Upon because Orvar's out? So for 1 mana, Prey Upon, you're going to have 2 creatures fight. You're going to force them to sacrifice cards based on however much damage that their creature did to your Obliterator, and then you're going to copy the Obliterator. So you're going to have 2 5/5s with Trample, and they're Obliterators, so they're going to have to sacrifice permanents based on however much damage that they do to it. It has so much potential in that one meme way, to where there was a lot of problems just in general with that Phyrexian Obliterator fight deck, and with this little change, it might help with it. However, you have to admit that at this point, it is turning into a 3-color deck. In a 3-color deck, when you're running Phyrexian Obliterator, which is 4 black sources, it's almost impossible for that to be in any way, shape, or form. So in order to get all these things casted, you're going to want to use things like Skyclave Relic, Gift of Paradise, Chromatic Lantern, pretty much anything that allows you to cast things with multicolored mana with ease. Without that, it's going to be almost impossible to do. So it is something you have to keep in mind, and which is kind of the biggest issue that the Phyrexian Obliterator fight deck has to begin with. The last one that I wanted to go over that I'm not sure if anyone thought about was the Elemental Uprising and Awaken of the Vitsugazi. So you're going to be targeting your lands, turning them into 4/4 elementals or 9/9, whatever they are. You're targeting your own lands with instants and or sorceries. So you're going to be able to copy your lands. You're also turning them into elemental creatures. You're attacking their face. It could be so fucking funny. You're going to be using Orvar. You throw in like Sylvan Awakening just for the extra memes, Elemental Uprising, Awaken to the Vitsugazi. It can be hilarious. This is one of the decks I'm really looking forward to building. With all of that said, you're going to have to be able to protect Orvar at some point in time. So we're going to use cards like Rescue or Disperse or Unsummon, something that's really cheap that you're targeting him just to bring it back to your hand, but also you're targeting him so you could just make a copy of him as you return it back to your hand. So you have a token copy of it, but you're also returning the actual copy to your hand. So you still have him in the battlefield, but you also have a backup copy in your hand, which is so cool. And I really like that idea. It's just a matter of how consistent it will be. It'll still be very difficult to deal with board wipes, but at the same time, you can still rescue, disperse, unsummon. You can do it, make a copy, but you'll still have the original in your hand, so you can just replay it the next turn, and it's perfectly fine. The third card that we're going to go over is Svella, Ice Shaper. Huge fan of this card. It's a 3-mana 2/4 legendary snow creature, troll warrior, of course, because I am a troll warrior, so naturally I would play this card. This creature has 2 abilities, and both of them are bad, but also very good. So the first ability is 3 colorless tap, create a colorless snow artifact named Icy Manolith, which is tap, add 1 mana of any color. Now, you don't have to sacrifice this, so it's just always there. You just tap to add 1 mana of any color. This is so amazing, it's ridiculous. So it's just a permanent mana rock that taps for any color. The second ability that Svella has is absolutely ridiculous. It's 8 mana, which is so expensive. You tap it to look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost, put the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is actually very expensive and probably not worth it. However, we do have a way of making this even better. In order to make this card even playable, I would say, we're going to use Zirda the Dawnwaker. Now, Zirda is a 3-mana 3/3. You almost never see it played, but you can use it as a companion, so each permanent card in your starting deck has an activated ability, but it's not necessary. We could probably figure it out at some point in time when we end up building the decks, which you will all see all 69 deck lists in the description below. But all abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 colorless less to activate. The effect won't reduce the mana less than 1 mana. So this is very good. So again, take it back to the very first ability. 3 colorless tap, create a colorless snow artifact that taps to add 1 mana of any color. This now costs 1 mana. So you pay 1 mana, tap, create a mana rock that taps for any color mana. So for 1 mana, you're making a mana rock that taps for any color. That's obscene. That's so good. And this is also a token. So if you're running Anointed Procession for whatever reason, you're also making 2 of these tokens every single time that you make one of these. And for the second ability, paying 6 instead of 8 is still way overpriced. Paying 6 mana to only look at the top 4 cards of your library and cast anything for free, it's going to be very difficult to be able to justify that unless you have some type of aggressive scry mechanic that allows you to either always look at the top card of your library or something that allows you to just look at the top 3 or 4 cards of your library if you're able to scry and order the top 4 cards of your library. If you know what card you can cast, if you're able to draw some cards and put cards at the top of your library using the Blue Cavalier, for instance, that can do it. However, that just gets so expensive and it's almost unmanageable. So there has to be a way to do it. It's just one of those things that we got to figure out how to abuse it on that level. And since it is a snow permanent, we're going to probably run cards like Search for Glory. So it's just 3 mana, search your library for a snow permanent or legendary card, and reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. You gain life for each snow mana spent to cast this spell. So not only is this life gain, it's also a tutor for the exact card that we want. So good, such a good card. I think I'm going to use this in so many different decks because, again, you can do Snow Permanent, a legendary card, or a Saga. Any of these. It's very, very powerful. And again, like I said, it is also life gain. Maximum of 3 life, but still, 3 life is 3 life. And again, since this is going to cost so much mana all the time, we're going to use things like Replicating Ring, which is a 3 mana snow artifact, one of the newer ones. Tap, add mana of any color. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a night counter on it. If it has 8 or more, remove it and create 8 colorless tokens named Replicated Ring with tap, add 1 mana of any color. So this is very good. Again, it's basically the same exact thing as the tokens that Svella creates, but you get 8 of them, which is fantastic. It's the exact amount you need to activate Svella's second ability. This is really just all set up for later on in the game. I don't know if this is going to be a win more. I don't know how quickly it's going to be able to build this up. Being able to get into turn 11 for Replicating Ring to really be effective, I don't know if that's going to be possible, if we need to proliferate. It all comes down to what is going to be overkill, what is going to be necessary. We might just have to put in Lithoform Engine for its first ability to pay 2 tap and copy a target ability, which is Svella's. And again, with Zerta's ability, it's reduced by 2, but it can't go below 1. So Lithoform's first ability would cost 1 instead of 2, which is still very, very good. But that's going to be the general way of us being able to do things. There are so many different ways to use Svella. I don't know if we're going to use it just as a mana rock generator or if we're actually going to use the second ability. That's going to be the part that we really have to worry about. So for right now, I'm pretty much just going to abuse him as the mana rock ability. Using the activated ability, I think will be fine. Having a 4-butt instead of a 3-butt makes it a lot more difficult to get rid of. They can't just like use Shock or Lightning Strike or Anger the Gods. They have to actually invest some type of mana or good stuff into it in order to kill Svella. So for that, I also really like this creature. Now, the third card we're going to go over is going to be Fynn the Fangbanger. Now, yes, it's the Fangbanger because he fucks vampires, obviously. It's not Fangbearer, it's Fangbanger. Just read better, okay? So 2 mana, 1/3, legendary Death Touch. So right off the bat, not really all that great. However, the text is what gets my degenerate mind going, okay? Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. This is amazing because if somebody has 10 poison counters, they lose the game. So this is just fantastic overall. We are going to run Death Touch Tribal. I love Death Touch, but however, I love poison counters and infect counters. It was like my shit when it first came out. Apparently everyone fucking hates it. They hate it so much more than everything else. But I wasn't around when it was completely busted. I guess it could still be in some older formats. I'm not sure, but I'm going to break it even more in this current format. So you'll just have to be prepared for that. And of course, you can't just have a deck with one creature in it and just kind of poof and it's there. So you are going to need some support for this to really back up how powerful it can be. And that's what we're going to use Vraska Sworn's Eminence with. All right, so most of you probably have no idea that this planeswalker exists. However, it was one of my favorite planeswalkers when War of the Spark came out. So it's 4 mana Vraska, comes in with 5 loyalty. Passive has whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals damage to a player or planeswalker, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So that part is good, but also bad. It just kind of depends if we have Fynn on the battlefield or not. If we do, then it's kind of irrelevant. If we don't, then it is very relevant because we can just kill them with damage if we need to. Now, she also has a -2 of create a 1/1 Black Assassin creature token with Death Touch. And whenever this creature deals damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. So this is very good. It threatens planeswalkers. Of course, it's just a 1/1 Black Assassin creature token, so it threatens any type of blockers as long as they don't have first strike. It's a very, very good card. And since all those are really cheap and kind of easy to do, we're going to have to use Hornet Queen for the big mamma jamma. Now, Hornet Queen, nothing I've ever used in the past has even come close to utilizing this in any meaningful way, shape, or form. So Hornet Queen is a 7 mana 2/2 insect, right? Total garbage. However, it has flying and death touch. And then when Hornet Queen enters battlefield, create 4 green insect creature tokens with flying and death touch. This means you have 5 total creatures with evasion, which is flying, and death touch. And again, with Fynn, whenever a creature you control with death touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. It takes 10 poison counters to kill somebody. So if they don't have any flying creatures and they don't have a board wipe, your 7 damage that you deal with the Hornet Queen and the 4 6 damage that you deal is going to win you the game. Literally 6 damage wins you the game as long as you have Fynn out and Hornet Queen. It's kind of cool. It's a good deal. It's a good deal. Obviously, ideal situations never really happen or very, very rarely. And when they do, it's by luck on your point or unluckiness on their point. So we need ways to make it even more reliable, which is why we're going to use Plane-Wide Celebration to proliferate the poison counters on the opponent. So if you proliferate 4 times, you can actually proliferate poison counters on the opponent. So guaranteed they're going to have 2, or else they won't have any. Because if you hit them once with a death touch creature, they're automatically going to have 2 poison counters on them. So you're going to proliferate 4 times, takes them up to 6. If you get 1 more Plane-Wide Celebration, they're at 10 and they lose the game. So you need to hit them with 1 creature, and then you need to cast Plane-Wide Celebration 2 times. So this is a very good alternate win condition if you can't get Hornet Queen through. It's just one of those, again, alternate win conditions that can be very funny. Outside of that, the most important thing that we can do is keep Fynn alive once we get him on the battlefield. So we're going to use Heroic Intervention for that. Heroic Intervention, pretty simple. It's just 2 mana instant, make everything indestructible and hexproof. This is just very good in general. The only thing that's really going to take him out, if you have that in your hand, is going to be Settle the Wreckage. So that would suck if it happens, but it does happen. The best colors to build this deck is going to be either mono green or black and green. Those are really your only 2 options because black has a ton of death touch opportunities. Green has a bunch of death touch. Green also has a lot of ways to get creatures on the battlefield with like Great Henge. Some other lands, has a bunch of card draw, finales. There's a lot of things that green has in support of getting creatures onto the battlefield or getting them into your hand. Whatever it is that you might end up needing, green is very, very good with that. So I think if you're going all in on the poison counters, mono green is probably going to be your route. If you want to go more into the death touch meme area, then you're going to want to throw in black because black has a ton of good death touch stuff. This next card may be one of my favorites out of all of the cards, and it's not even a land destruction card. However, it enables so much fucking bullshit that I guarantee after listening to this next part of the video, you are going to be very upset that I just came up with this. And I am sorry in advance, because if this happens to you in a game, it's not my fault, but also it is my fault. And that card, of course, is In Search of Greatness. It's a simple 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell, from your hand with the converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the highest converted mana cost among other permanents you control without paying its mana cost. If you don't, scry 1. This is good on so many different levels. Worst case scenario, you get to scry 1 every single turn for just a 2 mana enchantment. That's just amazing in and of itself. Just to give you a little bit of an example of what I'm going to do with this card, we're just going to say, turn 0, we're going to throw down a Leyline any of the ley lines that cost 4 mana. Turn 1, we're going to throw down a land and then a grazer with another land, right? So we'll have 2 lands. Turn 2, we're going to put down another land and a In Search of Greatness, right? So turn 3, we're going to play a land, so that's 4 mana. And then we're going to play a Double Vision for free, right? Because we have the ley line. And since a ley line is 4 mana, Double Vision costs 5. So we get the Double Vision down for free. And then we still have 4 mana, so we're just going to cast any 4 mana land destruction spell, and we're going to copy it because Double Vision. So on turn 3, we're blowing up 2 lands. Turn 3, we're blowing up 2 lands. It's already ridiculous to blow up 1 land on turn 3, and it's very, very rare that you can. But the potential of being able to blow up 2 lands on turn 3 is actually fucking obscene. Now, of course, after that, it kind of slows down, or it can be more fun. The next turn, 6 mana enchantment, Haphazard Bombardment, Sunbird's Invocation. You can do Cure Best Sea Gods after that, Cruel Reality, 7 mana Bolus. After that, it kind of starts to slow down on your good options. You have Overwhelming Splendor, Zoltapa, Sandworm Convergence, Ugin. I suppose Ugin's like a really shitty option. As far as the 9 mana spells, this is where things get very skim. It's so hard to find a good 9 mana spell. Pretty much the only thing you get is Zakama. Now, Zakama can actually be very, very good because you get to cast it for free, but you are casting it from your hand. And Zakama specifically reads, if you cast it from your hand, untap all lands you control. So you just float all your mana, cast Zakama for free, untap all your land, and then tap them all for mana. It's ridiculous. You can actually double your mana quite a lot by casting Zakama for free. That is actually very, very, very good. And then, of course, the next turn you can play Olamog or Omniscience, something like that. But it could be very, very fun. It can spiral out of control. However, it gets down to the point where at what level is it too much or too little? You decide. All I know is that I'm going to have a ton of fun with this card, and I'm going to abuse the fuck out of it. It's something that I'm really, really interested in playing with, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. And I did get early access to Kaldheim on Wednesday, January 27th, so go ahead and follow me over at twitch.tv/StriderStone to catch all of these decks that you're going to see in the video today. And of course, it wouldn't be Mortal Kombat without Reidane. So we're going to put in Reidane, God of the Worthy. It's just a 3 mana, 2/3 God flying vigilance. It's kind of whatever. But has the ability of snow lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So this can be very disruptive, especially with all the new decks. This could be like an anti-meta card. Especially in standard, this may be a little bit more disruptive than you would want to do on like day 1 or 2, because it would kind of fuck with a lot of people and probably piss them off, which is exactly what I'll do. But you'll have non-creature spells your opponents cast with the converted mana cost 4 or greater cost 2 colorless more to cast. This is absolutely ridiculous. It's a great prison card. And I think this was a card that we really did need to really kind of complete the prison package. This is going to be really good with things like God Pharaoh Statue, Overwhelming Splendor, Smothering Tithe, Tithe Taker, the 3 mana Dovin. Just increasing their mana cost to an amount that they cannot control or they can't handle anymore is just something that's going to be so disruptive that they're just not going to want to play. All of their snowlands coming into play tapped. There's other cards that prison decks may actually be somewhat worthwhile now with Reidane coming into the format. And as for the other side of this card, it is going to be the Protector's Shield. So this is a 4 mana legendary artifact. If a source an opponent control would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent 1 of that damage. Now this is just fucking amazing. This is going to shut down so many decks like the Cavalcade decks, a lot of the like white weenie decks, the mono red aggro decks, something that's just attacking you for 1 damage every single time or 2 damage. This helps so much. Now it also has whenever you or another permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell unless their controller pays 1 colorless more. So this is just a whole giant package of awesomeness. Now obviously, since this card is very useful on both sides, the front and the back, you are going to have to realize which one is better for each situation. I think this card is going to be excellent in best of 1 because the main side that has Reidane on it is going to be more against the control matchup, more against people that are using instants and sorceries that are higher than 4 mana cost. But the other side, the Protector Shield, is going to be more against faster aggro decks, although this is going to be a lot harder to get off because it is 4 mana, and a lot of times you're dead before you get up to 4 mana. And this is why you have to get some early prison cards down on the battlefield before you can really get this down. But once you get this down, it is going to be so oppressive against a lot of decks. If you match this up with Authority the Consul, it is just, oh my gosh, it is going to be insane how good this card is going to be. I cannot wait. Again, I cannot wait to get my hands on all of these cards. There are a lot of cards that require a ton of build-up, but have large payoffs and are almost never used because it's almost impossible to get a valid payoff for the amount of effort you put into it. And this is probably going to be one of those. And that, of course, is Mystic Reflection. This is a 2 mana instant, 1 blue if you foretell it. Choose target non-legendary creature. The next time one or more creatures or planeswalkers enter the battlefield this turn, they enter as copies of the chosen creature. So this has a couple implications that can be both very good and very insane if used at a very meme jank level. This can be used both offensively and defensively depending on what situation you need it in, and that's why this card is actually good in most ways. You will most likely be using this defensively more than offensively though. So the way that you'll be using this defensively is usually when you would cast like Birth of Meletis on turn 2. Then turn 3, what happens is your Birth of Meletis creates a 0/4 wall, which is essentially just a shitty creature. It's just a blank whatever token creature. So if opponent was to cast a spell, cast a creature, what you do is you cast Mystic Reflection. In response, you target your wall and you say, okay, the next creature that enters battlefield comes into play as target of this wall. So if they're putting down like a Steamkin on turn 3 or an Annex or whatever it is they end up putting down, Orvar or just anything, it is just going to come in as a 0/4 wall. Especially if it's an aggro deck, they're not going to do anything with the wall. They can't even attack with it. And if you're a control heavy deck, you're not going to attack with anything crazy anyway, so having a 0/4 wall on their side doesn't really do anything. Offensively, this can also be very, very good because you can still use Birth of Meletis in the same scenario. So let's just say opponent has like a Combustible Gearhulk for whatever instance, right? So they have a Combustible Gearhulk that's later on in the game, and you have a Birth of Meletis and a Mystic Reflection. So you play your Birth of Meletis, then they play a Combustible Gearhulk. Your next turn happens, and your wall from your Birth of Meletis is about to come into play. Before that comes into play, you cast your Mystic Reflection, you target the Combustible Gearhulk, and then your 0/4 wall comes into play as a Combustible Gearhulk instead of a 0/4 wall. So again, there are a lot of interesting ways that you can use this defensively, both to help yourself come back from a bad situation or prevent your opponent from getting into an advantageous situation. Since we will have to use this defensively more than anything else, I would say probably 80% of the time, 75% of the time, you're going to want to get some type of recursion from the graveyard, whether it's Bala Ged Recovery, Once in Future, Tamiyo, Gaia's Blessing, anything like that. You will need some type of recursion to get it back so that you can cast it effectively later on in the game to really give you that impact that you wanted to when creating the deck. And the 8th card is going to be Cyclone Summoner. Now this is a 7 mana 7/7 giant wizard. It's pretty rough. Now, when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, return all permanents to their owner's hand except for giants, wizards, and lands. As of right now, giants are not very good and wizards are not very good either, so I don't know if this is really going to help in any way, shape, or form. However, there are a lot of giants that are going to be coming with Kaldheim, so it's possible that this could be usable, and that's going to be mainly with Calamity Bearer and Quakebringer. So with Quakebringer, it's a 5-mana giant berserker, again, very, very expensive. For a 5/4, your opponents can't gain life, which is awesome. At the beginning of your upkeep, Quakebringer deals 2 damage to each opponent, so not you, which is really, really good and very rare for a red card not to do damage to both players. Regardless, this ability triggers only if Quakebringer is on the battlefield or if a Quakebringer is in your graveyard and you control a giant. So you can control any giant, and if Quakebringer is in the graveyard, this will still do 2 damage to the opponents. So when you're dealing with red or even with blue, you can draw cards and discard cards. There's a lot of cards in those colors that do that. There's a ton of cantrips, whether it's just Jace, the 4-mana Jace that does it, whether it's just Thrill of Possibility, whether it's Thirst for Meaning. I mean, there's a lot of cards. There's so many cards that have you discard cards and draw cards in the same way. So this can make Quakebringer a very viable card in that sense. However, you need to have a giant on the battlefield. There are some cheap giants like Bone Crusher Giant, but it's hard to just keep those around all the time. So you're going to need something beefy like the Cyclone Summoner that will help with that. And the other one we're going to focus on is going to be Calamity Bearer. Now this is a 4-mana giant, so it's cheaper, which is good. It's a 3/4. If a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So this is just amazing. It's a 4-mana card. Being able to deal double damage to anything is always fantastic, especially when you're talking about giants. Unfortunately, giants do not have trample for whatever reason, or at least pretty much none of them do. So that part really sucks. However, still being able to do double damage, all you need to do is get 1 giant through, and it's like a big oof. The other card in Kaldheim that we have available to us is going to be a 5-mana saga. Again, all this stuff is so expensive. So expensive for giants, and that's going to be the biggest barrier to entry. So it's a 5-mana saga, Battle of Frost and Fire. When it enters battlefield, deal 4 damage to each non-giant creature and each planeswalker. So this is actually really good. It's essentially a Storm's Wrath on a enchantment, but it doesn't hit any of your giants. So if you're running a giant deck, this is actually really, really, really good. The second chapter is you get to scry 3, which is also very good, being able to scry 3 when you're trying to look for something that's either a land. Again, when you're working with giants where everything is so fucking expensive, being able to scry 3 to make sure you get your land drops is actually very, very important. The next chapter, whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost 5 or greater, this turn, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. So again, this also contributes to Quakebringer. So we put Quakebringer in the graveyard, then we can start doing 2 damage to the opponent every single turn. But again, this only comes after the 3rd chapter of Battle of Frost and Fire, which again, I mean, if you get this out, since it's blue and red, you're not going to have a ton of mana. So this comes out on turn 5, and then chapter 2 is turn 6, chapter 3 is turn 7, and then you put the Quakebringer on turn 7, then you're starting to do 2 damage every turn. They're on a 10-turn clock on turn 7. It's like, and that's only if you have another giant on the battlefield. It's just, it doesn't seem like it's going to be good or viable. However, it's a giant meme, so we're going to mess around with it. See what I did there? Giant meme, and they're giants. So proud of that one. It's a good one. It's a good one. We're keeping it. We're keeping it. Now, there are 2 different cards that we can utilize that will enable us to branch away from the giant meme that we would be going with. And the first one is going to be Arcane Adaptation. It's a 3-mana enchantment. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control are the chosen type in addition to other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So this includes in graveyard, exile, in your library, etc. The other card that we're going to have available to us in Kaldheim is going to be Maskwood Nexus. This is a 4-mana artifact. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards that you own that aren't on the battlefield, which again includes graveyard, library, and exile. So this is just a really, really good way to get out of the whole has to be a giant type of thing. So you can actually run this as just a mass bounce spell, but in those cases, you would almost rather just use one of the other, like Flood of Tears or something like that. This is an AoE bounce spell with a 7/7 body, but I just don't know if that's good enough or worth it. So it's something that you'd have to decide. It can be a very lopsided bounce if you have multiple giants out, obviously, and it could technically win you the game on just one single backswing. Once again, since giants don't have trample, this can be very, very good, but I mean, if you're going to use something like Maskwood Nexus or Arcane Adaptation, it's going to have to be something completely different. I just have no idea what to even begin to think of with that. Card number 9. This is Tibalt's Trickery. Now, I haven't decided if I actually want to use this or not and put it into a deck. I'm very confused, very conflicted, because against all of my well-being, I don't want to play counter spells. I'm like, don't play counter spells, don't play counter spells. But this one, I mean, it's a red counter spell. Does that even really count? Does it really count? Let me know in the comments section below if it counts. Just let me know. Tibalt's Trickery is a 2-mana instant counter target spell. This already is really good because it's just counter any spell, right? Then you choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards. I have no idea what the significance is of that. I don't know why it's in there. Then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than the spell that they were casting, different than the one that was countered. They may cast that spell without paying its mana cost. Then they put the exile cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. So they're still going to get 1, 2, or 3 cards milled into their graveyard. I have no idea why that milling part is significant in any way, shape, or form. Now you may be asking, Strider, why even use a counterspell? Why not just go face and kill people? You're playing red, right? And obviously many of you know that I don't play creatures. So the other half of you are like, well, if you're going to play counterspells, why not just play blue? Other half of you are like, well, you don't play counterspells. So now it comes down to, why would you even mention this in a main part of the deck instead of just a secondary, hey, we're going to probably put this in a deck, but the main focus is going to be this other card. So we can abuse this in many different ways. The ways that we abuse this is through Deafening Silence, Rule of Law, and Archon of Emeria. Now, Deafening Silence is just a 1-mana enchantment. Each player can't cast more than one non-creature spell each turn. Again, this is really only going to affect some of the decks, especially in Best of 1. The majority of them are aggro decks, so we probably won't use Deafening Silence, but if you're running Best of 3, you may run into more spell slingers than aggro players, so it's something to keep in mind. But usually we'll run Rule of Law or Archon of Emeria. So Rule of Law, 3-mana enchantment. Each player can't cast more than one spell each turn. This is super, super cool. Next one, Archon of Emeria, same thing. It's just a 2/3 flyer for 3 mana. Each player can't cast more than one spell each turn, which is great. But it also has non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, which is also super cool. Again, since this is a counter spell, they're going to play something on their turn, and you're going to be like, counter spell. And you're going to counter it. They're going to go through, they're going to choose, 1, 2, or 3 at random. They're going to mill some cards, and then they're going to exile top cards of their library before they cast something. They're like, I'm going to cast this. But since you have Rule of Law or Archon out, they can't cast more than one spell. And since Tibalt's Trickery says they cast it, they can't do it. So it's actually really, really cool. It works in mysterious ways, but I think it should be really fun to do stuff like that. And as for some of the honorable mentions, we have Drannith Magistrate and Gravedigger's Cage. So, Gravedigger's Cage, creature cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield, but most importantly, players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. So this basically completely shuts down any benefit that anyone else would get from Tibalt's Trickery. Very, very good. And then Draenith Magistrate, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands, which is also just kind of puts the kibosh on that. And last but not least, well, probably least, we have Roiling Vortex, 2 mana enchantment. The beginning of each player's upkeep deals 1 damage to them. Kind of sucks, but whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, it deals 5 damage to that player. So, Tibalt's Trickery, since they're casting it without paying their mana cost, Roiling Vortex will do 5 damage to them. However, you're still taking the gamble of them being able to cast a spell for free, and you have no idea what spell that is. So, Roiling Vortex is an option, but I just don't think it's a good option. But it's there. And of course, the biggest benefit that we can get from Tibalt's Trickery is countering our own spells. It would be so cool if you would just counter your own spell, then mill some cards, and then all of a sudden cast an Ulamog from your library on like turn 3. So you're going to cast like a turn 3 Gravedigger's Cage, and then you're going to counter it with Tibalt's Trickery, right? For whatever reason you decide to. And then all of a sudden you have a turn 3 Ulamog, because you just exile, then you get an Ulamog and exile 2 of their things, and it has the potential to be very busted. It can also have the potential to be very annoying. It can also be very bad at the same time. So there's 3 different routes you can go to. It just depends on what you want to do with it. And for the 10th card, we have Toralf, God of Fury. It's a 4 mana 5/4 Trampler God. Whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, Toralf deals damage equal to the excess to any target other than that permanent. You do realize what this means. There really only is like one thing you can do with this card, and that's Starve Extinction, I believe. Yeah, I think Starve Extinction is really the only thing you can do with this card. You're really just, especially if they have a bunch of things out, you're just going to Starve Extinction, blow up a bunch of their stuff, and deal all the excess damage to their face. It's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. You do have to have the God of Fury on the battlefield when you Starve Extinction, but outside of that, it's going to be hilarious. Now, the card we used with Starve Extinction for the finisher before this was Brash Taunter. Brash Taunter is a 5 mana creature. It's a 1/1. Whenever it's dealt damage, deals that much damage to an opponent. However, Toralf is quite a bit better because it deals excess damage to everything over to the opponent. However, if opponent doesn't have any permanents, being 0 creatures, 0 planeswalkers, Toralf is essentially useless outside of it being a 5/4 trample, which is still very useful. So you also have to keep that in mind. Since there are a lot of life gain decks out there, getting above 20 life was super easy for a lot of people, and that's why using the Brash Taunter Starve Extinction combo kind of lost its flavor. It made it very difficult to actually finish people off in one Starve Extinction, especially if it was mono white. But now with Toralf, you throw Starve Extinction down with Toralf out, they have like 10 creatures, a planeswalker, you're dealing 20 damage, excess of like 50 or 60 at least. Everything is going to their face, and it should be extremely easy to just kill people. With Toralf only being 4 mana, you can cast this on turn 4 or 3, I guess, depending if you have any ramp. And then the next turn, all you gotta do is cast Ironcrag Feet into your Starve Extinction, and boom, easy game. However, again, they have to have at least 1 creature or 1 planeswalker on the battlefield to do any type of damage to them. And it has to be excess damage. It's not raw damage like Brash Taunter would be. So it is possible that you would put Brash Taunter with this card. Using Fiery Emancipation is also very good with this card, just like we did with Brash Taunter. So it has a lot of synergy with the same exact type of decks that we had before. It's just a matter of what are we going to do with either adding this or building more around it. The other side of this card is Toralf's Hammer, 2 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature has 1 and a red, tap, unattach it, deals 3 damage to any target. and then return it to its owner's hand, and then equipped creature has +3/+0 as long as it's legendary, and it has a quip of 2. It's bad. I don't think this part's good. It's essentially irrelevant. Don't even worry about this part. It's just fucking whatever. Toralf as the creature, that's the only thing we care about. And as for yesterday's comment question of the day, I asked you, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the greediest, how greedy do you play Magic? Here are your answers. And if you want your comment featured in these videos, make sure that you answer the comment question of the day every single day, 7 days a week in the comment section below. And this concludes the first batch of 10 cards that I'm really excited to brew around when Kaldheim comes out. And again, on Wednesday the 27th, I will be streaming all of these decks and brewing sessions live over at twitch.tv/StriderStone, so make sure to go tune into me there. If not, tomorrow I will also have the second batch of 10 cards that I'm really excited about. Yo, what up YouTube? Yeah, we going here, Strider. Come on. You didn't really think that I was that type of person, did you? Thank you everyone so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you were even a little bit entertained by this video, please make sure to let me know down below. And if you have anything that you would like to see next, go ahead and leave that there too. And make sure to check out my live stream 5 days a week, every day except Sunday and Thursday. Stream times down below.